Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Chairman. This is a board game related Q&A session where you can ask me anything you like concerning board games. As usual, thank you to everybody who submitted questions on the last Q&A, and if you want to keep the series going, then please do submit your questions below in the comments and I'll be sure to answer them next time. If anybody did submit a question and I've not answered it this time, sometimes YouTube plays games with questions and they just don't appear to me, so I've not deliberately avoided anything. It's just the way that YouTube works, unfortunately. Before I get started on some of these great questions, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. If you use the show notes or use the code in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. But let's get cracking with the questions, and we're going to start with a question from James, and he's asked, what is my favourite game that takes 15 minutes or less? Now, I actually found it quite difficult to find games that took that time period or less, because most of them sit around 20 minutes for a super fast game, but I did manage to rustle up a few, and some of my favourites are Splitter, quite a quirky little roll and write style game, Cross Clues, which is a nice party one, Quicksand, a real-time kind of almost dexterity game where you're trying to time these sand timers and flip them over at the right time, and also Trio, known as Nana, as well. So just some examples there of ultra quick games. He's also asked, what is my favourite travel game? And there's two games that I tend to go to when taking them overseas or on trips. Number one being Coloretto, really nice little pushy luck set collection style game, and also Battle Line, an older Knizia kind of a poker style game. These two games are great because they do manage to pack up in very small boxes. They don't take up much space in your luggage. So thank you for the questions, James. Tony has asked, do I have any techniques to distinguish colours from one another? That is because I am colourblind, and sometimes games don't come colour-coded or don't have little symbols on them to help you differentiate them. Normally, it just results in me asking a friend or a family member who isn't colourblind to separate those kind of components for myself and my brother, who is also colourblind. So sometimes we just have to wing it, and I don't really have any designated technique or anything like that. I've never gone to the length of, say, maybe putting dots or something on certain components because I don't want to ruin them when it comes to maybe moving them on down the line. He's also asked, is winning important to me, or is the gameplay experience all that matters? Now, I am quite a competitive person and I like winning, but it's certainly not at the forefront of why I enjoy gaming. A lot of my favourite games I'm really terrible at, and I've hardly ever won them. So it definitely is all about that gameplay and that experience, and sharing it with the people I care about. So that's much more important to me than winning, despite me being a competitive person. He's asked, why has your taste evolved away from heavier games? Now, this was also asked by Hudson and a few others of you as well, because you have kind of noticed over, say, the last year or two that I have steered away from a lot of the heavier Euros. And there are multiple reasons for that. I'm going to touch on a few of them because I don't remember all of them, to be honest. Number one, I play so many games. I have a lot of games coming through my channel, and when it comes back to revisiting more heavier, more complex games, it becomes quite a chore to relearn them, and because you can't memorize all those rules, all those fiddly rules minutiae. So that's one big issue. It prevents them getting them to the table. Life is generally a bit busier for me now than it was a few years ago, when I had a lot more downtime to learn these more complex games. Now I like to kind of learn a rule book quite quickly and get it played more quickly. And it also means I can play more games on a gaming night, because more complex games generally mean they're longer games in their entirety. And something I've also found just from experience is that just because a game is heavier, it doesn't necessarily mean it has more depth or it's more interesting. A lot of the time now, I find that these heavier games have a bunch of different mechanisms kind of executed to a lower standard than, say, a lighter game that will have one particular mechanism or two mechanisms executed to a very high standard. So I much prefer to play games that are usually a bit shorter, a bit less complex, but have a one or two definitive mechanisms that really do shine. But thank you for the questions, Tony, and hopefully that somewhat answered your question. Tommy Chimaru has asked, has your change or taste in games affected your gaming group? No, not at all. I play with the same people. I've got my close group of friends and my family. So yeah, I've got no change there at all. We play anything together, we'd have a good time. So we're not really game focused, we're more group focused. He's also asked, do you play with a different group or has their taste changed too? No, as I said before, I do play with the same people. But thank you for the questions. Brother Toasty has asked, if I were to go to Japan, which gems would I pick up? Now, I actually don't have any suggestions for this question. Now, if you asked me a couple of years ago, I probably would have. But it seems more and more common now that these more niche Japanese games are making it over to to the West and becoming more accessible. I'm thinking of games such as Nana, also known as Trio now, games like Wind the Film, which has been reprinted as Photograph, and Rumble Nation. These Rumble Nation is a bit more hard to get, and I would recommend picking that one up if you can. But if it hadn't been reprinted, I would have said Wind the Film, again known as Photograph now. Uplift has asked, have I tried any Cube Rail games, such as Chicago Express or Irish Gauge? I've not tried any of those two you mentioned, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure if I can even define what a Cube Rail game is. I assume it has something to do with using cubes as the rail track instead of tiles. If that's the case, I haven't played a game like that. I did have a quick search on what categorises as a Cube Rail game, and I'd only played one of them from that list, and that game was Stephenson's Rocket, which is an older Reiner Knizia game, and I did not like that game at all, despite me really enjoying Knizia games on the whole. It was just a little bit too stop and start for me. It was very grindy, I thought. But those other ones you mentioned, I've not tried, so I can't really give an educated answer. But if you could sum up what a Cube Rail game is to me in a line or two, then I'd certainly look into it and hopefully increase my knowledge. But thank you for the question. Kevin has asked, what are my thoughts on Whistle Mountain? So I have played Whistle Mountain. I like the concept of it. I liked a lot of the mechanisms. Now, my problem with it was, and this seems to be a running theme with, I think it's Luke Laurie, who was the designer, I find his games a little bit too loose. And I found Whistle Mountain too loose, where you'd always be flooded with resources. You could always kind of do what you wanted to do. And I found that with each play that I experienced with Whistle Mountain. So again, I tend to like my Euro-style games to be a little bit tighter, to have to work a bit harder to get your resource and to pull off those big moves. This one just seemed a little bit too forgiving for me, and that's what ultimately steered me away from it. Now, again, mechanically, I think the game is really sound. I like the game. I'll probably rate it about 6 out of 10, maybe a bit higher. But I would have liked it to be a little bit tighter to make me work for those points. He's also asked, have I ever used proxy components to simulate another game? Yes, I have. The only game that springs to mind is an easy one, which is Dixit. I know I've used Mysterium components to play Dixit. Now that's a very easy one to proxy, but none other ones kind of spring to mind immediately, but I'm sure I've done it before. But thank you for the questions, Kevin. Till has asked a couple of questions. The first of all being, have I played Byzance, and what are my thoughts on the game? Yes, I have played Byzance quite a few times. I used to have it in my collection. I think it's a cool game. I think it's quite interesting the way that it works. My only issue with it is I think it's a little bit too, I don't know, maybe a little bit too fiddly at times. It doesn't flow as nicely as I would like it to. Maybe I'm being hypercritical there, because I do actually think that now I've played so many more card games since Byzance, I think Byzance is way higher quality than a lot of them that I've played. If you don't know what Byzance is, it's kind of a hand management game where you're using cards not only for set collection, but you're using them to bid on future cards as well. There's also this kind of cool market mechanism where if you acquire fewer cards in this kind of bidding round, then you get to take more cards from the market that other players have built up. Again, I do like it. I think it's a little bit too procedural to be one of the great card games. He's also asked what are my thoughts on Tybor the Builder, and have I played it at 4 players. I liked Tybor the Builder. Again, it's been a long time since I played this one, and I don't think I've played it at 4 players. I think I've only played it at 2 and 3 players. It's kind of like a an engine building style game, as you're constantly getting discounts and things by playing more cards. It does have a Alexander Pfister feel to it because it is designed by him. I did like it, but it felt a little bit soulless for me, so it didn't ultimately resonate with me that well. But I thought it was a good game. Quintena has asked, what are my opinions on the failings of rulebooks? Now, if you'd asked me this a few years ago, I'd be a lot more forgiving than I am now, because I used to have quite an easy way of just understanding and grokking what these rulebooks meant, even if it wasn't explained that clearly. Now I've read so many and played so many games, when I read these rulebooks, and there are ambiguities, I find it very frustrating, because I can say, well, does it work like this or does it work like this? It's not clear to me. And I find that stuff really annoying, and I understand that they're quite easy to make these mistakes when you're writing these books. But yeah, I can't deny that it does frustrate me quite a lot. And I've played quite a few games recently, actually, that I found it real hard work and found it like pulling teeth to make sense of these rule books. So I think at this point, when there are so many games out there and the hobby space is getting bigger and bigger, it's kind of unforgivable. So yeah, sadly, it is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. But again, I do find it frustrating, as I'm sure all you guys do as well. But thank you. Richard has asked, would I consider ranking game designers? Yes, I would. I have actually made a list maybe a few years ago now, when I did rank I think my top 10 favourite board game designers. And I'm sure it probably would change now if I remade that list, because when I was making that list, I was kind of really showcasing those heavier Euros from the Italian designers, like Ticini and Luciani. I still love those guys, but I do prefer some purist designers more than that now, like Knizia. So maybe I will readdress that list. But I'm also going to think about doing some lists where I will take a certain designer and kind of categorize where I put their games. Now, I appreciate there's not that many designers that have a big catalogue of games, but there are a few, like the Stefan Felds, the Rosenbergs, the Knizias, the Paolo Moris, the Martin Wallaces. So there are quite a few designers that I could do that with. And, I've often found that I rate games quite differently than a lot of other players do, so it might be a different take. He's also asked, do I have any games unplayed for more than a year or two? Yes, I do. I'm trying to make that less of a thing, because I'm actively making a mental note of games that have been the longest played on my shelf to make sure that I play them first and put them at the forefront. And I've also been kind of trimming down those games that, again, don't hit the table so regularly, even if I do really like them, because what's the point in having some great games if I never play them? That is actually his next question, where he says, does this factor into me moving them on? Yes, it does. And now I do have a few of them that I haven't played in a long time, and that's normally because they are smaller boxes, so they don't take up too much space, and they normally require those higher player counts, which I rarely have the opportunity to explore. So I've had games like the Resistance Avalon unplayed for a long time, games like Tifa Tashin unplayed for a long time, but I love them so much that I would certainly not consider getting rid of them, because when I do have those bigger player counts, I'd certainly love to pull them off the shelf and get them played and have them there ready. And he's asked me, am I going to the UK Games Expo this year? Yes, I am. I'm only going on the Friday. And he's asked, what do I like about the UK Games Expo? I just enjoy the day out. I think it's a good showcase. Always busy. I like going, kind of taking a punt on games. I like going to the bring and buy sale to find some bargains. So I normally use it as a bit of a shopping day, really, rather than a gaming day. So again, it's kind of just an opportunity for me to get a bunch of games that'll keep me going on the channel for a little bit longer, and maybe pick up a hidden gem or two, or take a punt on a few games that I maybe wouldn't buy, say from a website or something like that. But it's normally a good day out. I enjoy it, and it's just fun. He's also asked, would I consider bringing a game to the expo that I want to share? I wouldn't actually, because again, I don't use the expo to play games, and if I was to do that, then I would rather play games that I don't own, so that I can try things before I buy them, or try things that I wouldn't normally play. So normally when I go to games clubs and things, I'd rather play someone else's game that I don't have or that I've not played before, and I would use an expo for the same reason, really, rather than sharing games that I already love. But thank you for the questions, Richard. Some really good ones there. Alexander has asked, what Feld game would I like to see re-implemented into the City Collection? I'm not quite sure if there are any of them that I'd like to get see re-implemented into the City Collection. Because generally I'm not a huge fan of the way that the Queen have handled the whole thing, to be honest. I think the graphic design isn't the best. I think they're way too expensive. And to be fair, I'd rather another company reprint some of these old ones. So, when I saw that games like Bruges were being reprinted, I did end up picking up Hamburg, but I'd rather another company have taken the reins rather than Queen, because I'm not quite sure if I like the way they do business. I'm trying to think any other ones that I'd like to see remade. I'm not quite sure. I think I have all the ones that I want to play. Maybe, I think the only one is Strasbourg. He's also asked, what Feld game would I like to see an expansion for? Interesting question. Now, I think you, on your question, did say that you would like to see one for the Oracle of Delphi. That is one of my favourite Feld games, and I think that definitely has room to put some expansion content in there. Maybe add some different missions and some different tricks and that you could pull. I've not really thought through what the expansion content would be, but again, I can definitely see room for that game to be changed. Maybe change some of the god powers up and stuff like that. So yeah, Oracle of Delphi would be right up there for me. You did mention Amerigo. I'm not quite sure if Amerigo needs an expansion, but obviously you do. But thank you for the questions. Koji Malasofi has asked, what is my favourite Legacy game? I can't really say any because I think I've only ever played one, and that was The King's Dilemma, which I didn't really think much of at all. He's asked, do I enjoy deck builders? Yes, moderately so. I've not played that, well, I have played a lot of them, but not that many I've kind of fallen in love with. And deck building in general seems to be more popular with other people more than it does myself. Now, I'm definitely below the average gamer, I think, when it comes to liking that mechanism. But he's asked, what is my favourite deck builder? At the moment, my favourite deck builder is The Quest for El Dorado, a simple racing deck builder by Rainer Knizia. Just skipping tiles and things to race to the end, playing certain cards to match terrain cards. I tend to like deck builders when they are not so bloated and you don't need to constantly keep getting new material. I understand that is kind of part and parcel with the mechanism, and I have done a deep dive into some deck builders before, such as Legendary. I ended up picking up pretty much all of the expansions for Legendary and ended up becoming so bloated that it was just unplayable, really. So I try to avoid those styles of games now, and if I do want to play a deck builder, I would go something a bit more self-contained, such as The Quest for El Dorado. But thank you for the questions. The original Maverick has asked, have I ever regretted a review I made? Yes, one in particular comes to mind. I did review a game called Hidden Leaders, which was this kind of tug-of-war style game with some amazing artwork. I actually did remove my video of that because, in retrospect, I was a bit blunt and I think I came across as a bit rude when making that video. Too dismissive, and I think it was just completely uncalled for. So the designer did actually reach out to me and said, was that really fair? And I said, no, it wasn't. In retrospect, I did just take it down because I wasn't that invested in the game anyway. And I thought, yeah, fair play. This is someone's hard work. They put a lot of work into this, and who am I to dismiss their work? Other games that come to mind are ones when I first started the channel, and we all know when we get into the board game space, we're so enthusiastic about everything we play. So I was putting up positive reviews about pretty much everything, really, such as Dead of Winter, which is a game I really don't like at all now. I gave that one quite a positive review, but at the time I was being honest because I was enjoying everything. But it's kind of off-brand now with the kind of games that I like. So more of a change of taste than regrets. But again, the only one that I really regret is that Hidden Leaders review. He's also asked what happened to Corporate Cardboard. So if you're not sure what Corporate Cardboard was, it was a show that myself and Mackenzie Franklin used to do together. It was kind of like a variety show. The only reason that it stopped was because Mackenzie stopped making videos for his channel because he got a job with conflicting interests. So that was the reason why. no other reason. I love making corporate cardboard videos. I love working with Mackenzie. He was a great voice in the hobby, but he moved on to pastures new, and we couldn't do it anymore. It was also becoming a bit more difficult for us to sort a time out when we could actually stream together, because he lives in Colorado, I live in England, so we are like 7 hours time difference, which you can imagine was quite difficult to sort a time out to actually meet. He's also asked, do I assume rules when I learn them from the rulebook? And can this disappoint me if I presume something and it is not the actual case? Yes. So actually, this is kind of a follow-up question from the last episode when I said that I prefer to teach games than to be taught games, because my mind jumps to places and I think, well, this obviously is going to work like this, when in reality it doesn't. Now, sometimes when I read rulebooks, and I think, oh, this is cool, this is going a certain direction, this has got a cool mechanism to be brought up here, and then it doesn't end up doing that. So yeah, I do sometimes do that. I can't give an example, but I definitely have made a mental note of times when I have kind of filled in the gap myself, and that's not been the way that the game actually works. So yeah, it does happen. I don't really feel either way about it, but yeah, it does happen. But thank you so much for the questions. Brett has asked, is there a game where I prefer the first edition, or do I replace to stay up to date? Now, I'm not sure if I've replaced that many games over the years with the newer editions. One that I did do was I replaced Nova Luna with Framework, because I thought it was a bit more going on, even though I preferred the artwork of the original Nova Luna. Games that I preferred the original on, at least from a visual standpoint, is Libertalia. I really hated that new Stonemaier version of Libertalia. It just looks terrible. Whereas the original Libertalia looked gorgeous. So I'm really surprised why they went in that direction, maybe to make it a little bit more family friendly. But I still have the original Libertalia, and I would definitely keep that one over the new one. I wouldn't necessarily call this a second edition, but it is a re-implementation. I much prefer Chinatown over the Waterfall Park, whatever that one is. Just terrible retheming. It doesn't make any sense. I suppose another one would be, I would much rather keep my copy of Bora Bora over getting, say, the new Queen version of Cusco. So yeah, I do prefer those older style games from the Steppenfeld City collection, believe it or not, which we mentioned earlier. So a couple of examples there. Alex has asked, do I prefer to lose by a small or large margin, or do I prefer to win by a small or large margin? Both of the questions would be a small margin. It's not nice to get absolutely battered by your opponent, and doesn't feel good to batter your opponent either, at least in my opinion. I would much rather the game be tight until the very end, and the winner just squeeze a victory. And normally with me that is the case, because the people I play games with the most are very similar in our kind of experience and skill level. So we're always back and forth on who wins the games anyway, so that's a good touch. Daly has asked, have I ever played Coffee Roaster or Friday? So two quite well respected solo games there, and I haven't played either of them, unfortunately. Now, if you watch my content regularly, you might know that I very seldom play solo games, and if there was a solo specific game, then it's quite unlikely that I'm going to end up acquiring it into my collection or playing it at all. And I'm sure they're good games, but I've not played them, so the answer is no, unfortunately. But that wraps up all of the questions. So thank you to everybody who has submitted them. Some really interesting ones there. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. As I said, if you do want to keep the series going, then you're going to have to submit some more questions below. No worries if not, we'll just continue the series later on down the line. But again, if you do have a question, please leave it in the comments and I'll be sure to answer it next time. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.